Anywhere between 70 to 90%, depending on which study you look at, it's been found of your aging is based on your lifestyle and environment as opposed to your genetics. So in other words, whatever your rate of aging is or your biological age is, as long as you're making the right choices with your lifestyle and environment, you can actually slow down that aging rate and reduce your biological age.
Hello, I'm Dr. Wendy Myers. Welcome to the Myers Detox Podcast. And on this show, we talk about everything related to heavy metal and chemical detoxification, the health issues caused by toxins, bioenergetics, one of my passions, and anti-aging. And today we're going to be talking to my guest, Chris Mirabile, and he's going to be talking about the 12 mechanisms of aging. And he'll talk about mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, inflammaging, telomere shortening, and just many other topics. And we'll talk about his supplement line and his company, NOVOS Labs, where he's developed supplements targeting all 12 mechanisms of aging. And we'll talk about his top 10 longevity practices that you should be doing and the top longevity supplements as well. And we'll also talk about Chris's biological age test called NOVOS Age, done through epigenetic analysis and many other markers as well. And we'll talk about the importance of quantifying aging, why you want to be testing your biological age on a regular basis, because it provides kind of the star metric to assess your overall health trends, and how every 7 to 8 years of your biological age reduction roughly equates to 50% lower mortality risk. And also how this biological age testing allows individuals to measure the effectiveness of their longevity interventions and if what they're doing for their health is working for them. So our guest today is Chris Mirabile, and as a serial entrepreneur, a brain tumor survivor, and the youngest winner of NYU Stern's business plan competition, Chris is known for beating the odds. Chris has co-founded multiple lucrative startups, including a commercial real estate tech platform whose first clients possess more than $500 billion in USD assets. Chris's success hit early with Hotlist, a startup that acquired nearly 250 million people's social plans that caught the interest of Google and Facebook. And all the while, Chris has been pursuing a lifelong passion of health and wellness with an emphasis on avoiding disease, spurred by his encounter with a brain tumor. And he's also interested in extending his lifespan and maximizing his performance and well-being. As a self-proclaimed citizen scientist, Chris dug into the scientific research on longevity and experimented with many supplements, with diet, exercise, and lifestyle hacks to find the secret to living a long, healthy life. And after more than a decade, Chris founded NOVOS, which is the first nutraceutical company that targets the 12 biological causes of aging to increase longevity. NOVOS includes a scientific advisory board of 6 of the world's top biologists and geneticists who study aging from Harvard, MIT, the Salk Institute, and more. And with NOVOS, Chris created much more than a supplement company. He built a first-of-its-kind consumer biotech platform that leverages the latest science to help people take control of their health spans and lifespans, called NOVOSLabs.com. You can also check out Chris in the Longevity Hackers documentary on Apple TV and Amazon Prime. Chris, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and also your company and how you managed to get achieve a biological age that's 13.6 years younger than your chronological age.
Sure. Okay. There's a lot there. So about myself, I grew up in New York, and when I was a teenager, was very interested in health and nutrition and fitness. And so it came as that much more of a surprise to me when I was suddenly diagnosed with a brain tumor after having a seizure. I was on a school trip in New York City, and next thing I knew, I woke up on the floor and I had blood all over my shirt because I severed my tongue. And they gave me a CAT scan and they found this brain tumor. And so that completely changed my perspective on health, on life. Prior to that, I looked at health on a more superficial basis of just wanting to be in good shape and playing sports well. I think that's how most young people think about health, but I had a very quick crash course in what health ultimately is, which is the optimization of our biology such that everything functions well and we avoid disease, we avoid chronic illness. And so after having that experience, I never wanted to go through something like that ever again. And so my interest shifted from reading Men's Health magazine to actually doing research. And I found myself on PubMed, having many different questions and then just looking for studies that could help me to comprehend different aspects of my health. And about a decade ago, I came across a scientific paper called The Hallmarks of Aging, published in the journal Cell. And this paper was like an epiphany for me. This paper, first of all, it broke down the mechanisms of aging. So the actual fundamental root causes of aging, which I never even thought you could do that for aging, right? Like I think most of us just think of aging as this process that just happens. As time elapses, we get older. But scientists have actually broken that down to understand on a biological level, microscopically, molecularly, what is actually happening to cause ourselves to get diseases and to our bodies to break down and become more chaotic, if you will, and eventually for us to pass away. And so understanding that there are these component pieces was empowering to consider the possibility of being able to interfere with their degradation and to potentially slow down that aging process. It also was really empowering to realize that aging is a process that is malleable. You can speed it up and you can slow it down. And we know this is factually true. We can do it in animal experiments, but we also know in humans. Like if you take someone, you take a pair of twins, and one of them is a chronic smoker, drinking a lot and laying on the couch, and the other one's living a healthy, fit lifestyle. You fast forward to when they're 60. First of all, who do you think is going to look younger, much less actually be younger in the sense of their biology, their abilities, their memory, their physical capacities, and their risk of disease? So we know it's possible. And this information then, along with the fact that the number one risk factor for disease is aging, and that includes cancer, but also heart disease and Alzheimer's and diabetes and so on. All of this together made me realize that the number one thing I should be focusing on for my health, both in the short term and feeling the best that I can, but most importantly for the long term and avoiding disease and premature death, was a focus on longevity. And that's when I launched into getting deeper into the science, networking with the top scientists in the field, going to biotech events and so on, and eventually launching my business.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, and you have a fantastic product line like anti-aging supplements, and you have tests as well, correct?
Yes, we also offer biological age tests that look at the epigenome. So this is which genes are turned on or off. And then there are patterns that emerge, and scientists at, for example, Duke and Columbia University, we license one of their algorithms where we're able to tell you the rate at which you're aging by looking at that epigenome. And the good thing is that about anywhere between 70 to 90%, depending on which study you look at, it's been found of your aging is based on your lifestyle and environment as opposed to your genetics. So in other words, whatever your rate of aging is or your biological age is, as long as you're making the right choices with your lifestyle and environment, you can actually slow down that aging rate and reduce your biological age.
So for anyone listening that really wants to detox their body, go to heavymetalsquiz.com. I created a quiz for you. It only takes a couple of seconds. Based on some lifestyle questions, you can get your toxicity score and get a free video series that answers all of your frequently asked questions about how to detox your body. Check it out, heavymetalsquiz.com.
Yes, yeah, and I'm really big on that. I've always been into health and wanting to look and feel as young as possible for as long as possible. And so detoxing definitely plays a big role in that because toxins definitely age you, start accelerating that aging process. But let's talk about some of the 12 biological causes that you found that promote aging and help us understand that exactly how it slows down the aging process.
Sure. So the scientific paper I mentioned that was published just over a decade ago, they identified 9 mechanisms of aging. But those same authors republished at the 10-year anniversary last year, and they added 3 more mechanisms to that list. So the original 9, we can start with mitochondrial dysfunction. So most of your listeners have probably at least heard of the idea of mitochondria, right? The power plants of our cells converting the fats and the carbs that we consume into the energy for our cells to perform their functions. And as we age, we have fewer of those mitochondria. And the ones that we do have are less efficient and effective at producing the energy that our cells need. And as you know, if something doesn't get the proper energy, it's not going to perform the way it should. And that's not just energy the way we think of it as like waking up after a good night of rest and feeling energized. I mean, literally the ability for our immune system to function properly, or our neurons to fire properly, or our heart cells, or our skin cells, right? So all of these cells need energy to perform properly. And that's not as effective as we get older. The second is cellular senescence. This one is becoming more popular. You hear people on social media talking about this concept of zombie cells. So senescent cells they do perform a function. So we don't fully understand senescent cells. It's a newer area of research, but one instance in which we have senescent cells is we might have a cancerous cell, and the body normally tries to remove it. The immune system will identify the cancer and remove it. But there are instances where the body can't remove it, and it turns that cell senescent, which is better than it being cancerous, obviously. But the senescent cell causes a problem in and of itself because it secretes an inflammatory molecule known as a SASP, senescent associated secretory phenotype is what SASP stands for. It's letting out these molecules that cause inflammation to nearby cells. And then those inflamed cells can also then turn senescent as well. And as we get older, the number of senescent cells go up exponentially. It's one of the reasons why our skin wrinkles or our arteries harden. So we want to try to remove those senescent cells, or at least reduce the rate at which our cells are turning senescent. Next is loss of proteostasis. So proteostasis is this idea of our proteins need to fold in a certain way. And when you think of proteins, most people don't know this, but proteins are like the messenger molecules within our bodies, right? They're sending signals to our cells to perform in different ways. So whether it be a peptide, which is just a short chain of amino acids, or protein, which is essentially just a very long peptide, it's a longer set of amino acids. These molecules are going to signal to our cells to behave in different ways. In fact, most prescription drugs, in one way or another, are impacting protein receptors on our cells. And so as we age, the proteins are not folding properly. And if it doesn't fold properly, it doesn't take on the right shape. And that shape is critical for it to bind with a protein receptor and to trigger that specific process on a cell. So if it's not able to trigger it, then the cell's not going to behave the way that it's supposed to. And also these proteins then start to accumulate inside and outside of the cell and kind of cause a mess around the cells because they're not being used properly.
Those are prions also, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yes. Yeah, because I think a lot of people have issues with prions that can promote dementia and poor brain functioning, et cetera. I use a Rife device to kill prions and misfolded proteins in my body. And that's kind of one way that you can address those is with Rife technology.
Interesting. I'm not aware of that technology, but I'll look into it. So, well, to that point, if the proteins are not being folded properly and able to communicate well, the next mechanism of aging is altered intercellular communication. So our cells are a vast network. We have essentially this like quantum level network. Our bodies are these vast information networks. Everything is communicating with one another. And when the proteins are not folding properly and not functioning properly, and for other reasons as well, our cells are not able to communicate with each other as well. And they need to be able to communicate with each other. For example, if one is inflamed and it needs to be repaired, let's say, it needs to be able to send out an inflammatory molecule to signal this so the body can come and help to repair it. But if it's not communicating well, then that cell might not end up getting repaired when it should be. Next is genomic instability. So this is a very popular one. This is actually, if you have ever heard of the free radical theory of aging, this is what was very popular in the 80s and 90s. It was the idea that we age because of oxidative stress. So oxidative stress causes DNA damage. And the theory was that we get older because over time, there's more and more damage to our DNA. Eventually, the information network within our DNA is is damaged, and therefore our bodies aren't able to function as well. But what we found is that genomic instability is actually just a small piece of the picture. It's a significant one, but it's nonetheless a small piece. We've got 11 other mechanisms, probably more, that will be discovered in the future. So genomic instability is this idea that our DNA gets damaged and the genes don't express themselves properly. And obviously, if you have a lot of DNA damage, you have a higher chance of cancer forming from these gene mutations. Next is epigenetic alterations. So I mentioned very briefly before the idea of an epigenetic clock, but the epigenome, you can think of your genome as like piano, the piano keys, and then your epigenome is like the music that's being played on that piano. So if you imagine, Vivaldi, the Four Seasons being played like when you're very young, it sounds like this beautiful song. But then as you age, a key might be missed, or the wrong key is played, or it's pressed too hard or too soft. And this is the idea of, as we age, specific genes turn on and off when they shouldn't, or are overexpressed or underexpressed. And the result is that, for example, maybe a skin cell starts to behave like a different body part cell when it shouldn't, or a gene to reduce inflammation is not turned on as loud of a volume as it should be, and therefore inflammation starts to spread and increase. So we can actually look at the epigenome and these patterns, as I mentioned before, and be able to approximate how old someone is on a biological level, which equates to approximately their risk of morbidity and mortality based on these patterns in their epigenome. After that is telomere shortening. This is also a relatively popular one. So a lot of people, when I ask if they know what, the causes of aging, they'll either say, the DNA damage, or they'll oftentimes say telomere shortening, because this was very popular over the past, say, 15 years or so. And these are the end caps of our chromosomes, and our chromosomes are what contain our DNA. And as we age, these telomeres, which are like end caps of your shoelaces, they get shorter and shorter. And eventually you get to the point where they're so short, they reach what's known as the telomeric brink. And this is, imagine your shoelaces, the end caps getting so short to the point that now the threads from the shoelace start to come out. And imagine that's like your DNA. So your DNA is not protected as much, and it starts to get exposed. And when you reach this telomeric brink, that's when the risk of disease goes up quite significantly. So this is one of those metrics where it's not necessarily about having the longest telomeres, because there's no difference between being on, say, the 60th percentile and the 99th percentile for your length, at least as far as research has found. But being at the 5th percentile is actually going to be associated with negative health outcomes. So you just don't want them to be too short. Next is deregulated nutrient sensing. So as we age, our cells are less tuned to nutrient signals. So these are things like mTOR and AMP kinase. So these are terms that a lot of people in the longevity community are familiar with. Like, for example, mTOR is a growth pathway. When we eat carbs and proteins especially, mTOR is upregulated, and so our body is in growth mode and more cells are proliferating. But that's also associated, believe it or not, with shorter lifespans. And that's why things like fasting, which reduce your mTOR levels, are associated with longer lifespans, largely because, not only, but largely because processes like autophagy kick off. So rather than creating more and more cells, the body says, oh no, we don't have food. We don't have this growth signal turned on. We need to recycle the cells that we do have. And so these older cells that aren't performing their function as well, the body scavenges them and will recycle those parts and use some calories from it and so on for the body to be able to survive. And that's actually a good thing, right? So these signals of mTOR, AMP kinase, IGF, and so on are deregulated, and they're not processed. Our cells are not processing them properly as we get older. So that's a negative. Number 9 is stem cell exhaustion. So a lot of people are familiar with stem cells, at least all of the injections, and that's kind of becoming a trendy area for rejuvenation. But stem cells are cells that essentially make copies of our cells. So as a cell dies off, the stem cell is what's able to then create a replica of it. And as we age, some of these stem cells, they reach what's known as the Hayflick limit. This is the number of divisions that the stem cell can complete before it gets to the point where it can no longer divide anymore. And it's almost like making a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Eventually, the quality declines and the cells are not coming out perfectly. And so these stem cells get exhausted, or they die off. We have fewer and fewer stem cells as we age, so we can't replace our cells as readily as when we're young. So those are the original 9. And then the 3 that were added, one is inflammaging. So that's a play on words. So it's inflammation plus aging. And it's because inflammaging is distinct from, say, an acute inflammation, which is a good form of inflammation. Maybe you scrape your knee and your body needs inflammation there to quickly repair it, and then you go back to normal. Or chronic inflammation, which can come from toxins, like you mentioned before, but it could come from eating a very unhealthy diet or laying out in the sun every day and getting sunburn from UV rays. So this chronic inflammation can occur from lifestyle practices. Inflammaging is different than both of them because it's something that is mediated by the aging process in and of itself. And so when we're young, there's really no inflammation. As we get older, it's like a whisper, and then it becomes like this quiet voice, and then it eventually becomes louder and louder until it's this like really deafening sound. Maybe when you're hitting your 80s or 90s, hopefully you're living that long. But that's when inflammaging is really becoming significant, and it's systemic. It's across the body that you're inflamed. Number 11 is disabled autophagy. So I mentioned before the idea of autophagy, of recycling these cells. So as we get older, our bodies and largely based on our immune systems are less capable of running that process of executing autophagy. And then finally, number 12 is dysbiosis. So this is our microbiome, largely based on our small intestine, but it's actually we have microbiomes on our skin and our mouth, in multiple different places. And so it's all of that. And the diversity of the bacterial species declines as we get older. And the forms of bacteria that we have, we tend to have less healthy bacteria as we age, and more of the unhealthy bacteria starts to propagate.
So this episode is brought to you by Chef's Foundry. They've got a fantastic line of cookware called P600. It's totally non-toxic. I think people don't realize that when they're cooking, most people's cookware is adding toxins to their healthy food, that people spend so much money on healthy organic food and then cook it in toxic cookware. And so that includes cast iron, which I do not recommend. It adds way too much iron in a form that we can't absorb. People use aluminum cookware, which is very inexpensive, and it's used at most restaurants, giving us tons of aluminum. People are also using ceramic cookware, which can leach toxins into your food. And not to mention the nonstick cookware. It just has so many PFAS or PFAS that is so toxic. It's one of the forever chemicals. So you really have to pay attention to what you're cooking in. So that's why I recommend the P600 line by Chef's Foundry, so that you can have peace of mind when you're cooking and you're not getting any nasty chemicals like lead or cadmium or nickel or PFAS in your healthy food. You can get a special discount for my listeners by going to bit.ly/Myers Detox. So that's bit.ly/Myers Detox, Myers Detox, to get an exclusive discount just for my listeners. I want you to be thinking about what you're cooking your food in, and I highly recommend the P600 line by Chef's Foundry. Yeah, so that's great. I mean, that's just such a very clear picture of why we're aging, and detoxification plays a huge role in what you mentioned with the free radicals and damaging our DNA, because that's exactly what heavy metals and chemicals are doing. And that's why my personal belief is that when you're removing toxins from your body, whether it's through sweating in saunas or foot baths or taking certain supplements, you're dramatically reducing the rate at which you're aging in doing so. And so you mentioned that you're aging at a rate 31% slower than normal, based on the testing that you've done. So what kind of specific habits and things have contributed to that?
Sure. And first, let me clarify what I mean by making such a extreme statement as saying that I'm aging 31% slower. So this is based on a number of different types of assessments. So there's no one single perfect way to measure this. Although we offer the biological age test at Novos, and this is probably the most accurate and precise way to measure the rate of biological aging. It's not the only way to. And so I've run a whole series of biological age tests looking at my epigenome. So there's many different algorithms. I've also looked at my metabolome, which is basically hundreds of different molecules that are in my blood, many of which people are familiar with from standard blood panels, many of which are actually these very almost seemingly random molecules, but that are correlated with aging. And even like physiological markers like my VO2 max and my visceral fat and my maximum heart rate and my resting heart rate, even something known as face age, which we offer for free on our website, where you can take a selfie, and that selfie is powered by AI, and millions of pictures have trained this AI, where we can tell you how young or old you look, and then skin health markers and facial health markers, and then we give you guidance for how to improve all of that. But all of this combined is essentially how I arrive at this slower aging figure. And so in terms of what do I do to arrive at that? Well, some of it is not necessarily perfectly known, right? Because like self-experiments, it's not like a scientific study with hundreds of people and we're trying changing one single variable at a time. So it's got confounders, is I guess what I mean to say. But the things that scientific research supports and I also have integrated into my life, those are the things that I'll focus on. So when it comes to diet, for example, I practice more or less a Mediterranean style diet. It's actually slightly tweaked. We have something called the NOVOS longevity diet on our website, which is 90% Mediterranean, but then some changes based on the latest research to make it that much more powerful. So I basically follow the NOVOS longevity diet. In terms of how many calories I consume, I'm typically either eucaloric, meaning I'm eating as many calories as I'm burning, or slightly hypocaloric. So I'm eating less than, I would say the average American is eating. I'm eating a little bit less. And caloric restriction is actually found to be the best method for slowing down aging and extending health span and lifespan. Of all things ever studied, caloric restriction is number one. Now, it's really hard to do significant caloric restriction, like 15 or 20% restriction. And I wouldn't recommend that to people because of quality of life that declines as a result. But being in a little bit of a deficit most days of the week, and then on the weekends, I might be a little bit hypercaloric and have a little bit more than I'm burning. It balances out to me being probably 5% below what I would normally be burning.
Where does fasting play a role in your health habits?
Yeah, so I do time-restricted feeding, which a lot of people call intermittent fasting, but technically it's different. So intermittent fasting would require that you're eating fewer calories while restricting the hours that you're eating. But if every single day you're doing the same time period that you're eating, eventually you're not restricting calories anymore. You're just eating the same types of food every day. So it's technically not an intermittent fast at that point. So I do time-restricted feeding, typically 16-8. So I'm not eating for 16 hours and I'm eating for 8 of them. It typically works out to like 11 a.m. to have my first caloric source, and then 7 p.m. I'll finish my dinner. And then I do 24-hour up to 72-hour fasts occasionally, but not that often. I used to do it more often, but a little bit less because I was finding I was losing some muscle mass from doing 72-hour fasts. And it's not necessarily the best thing for me to do, particularly because I am very physically active. And a lot of the benefits that I would get from fasting, I'm actually getting from that exercise. And so I don't necessarily want to counteract it with the fasting. But something like a 24-hour fast is actually surprisingly easy to do once you've done it a couple of times. The first time might be really tough and you might get hangry and if you haven't had these periods where you just go extended periods without food. But once you get used to it, it's actually surprisingly easy. And so a 72-hour fast, I might now do like once every 6 months, whereas I used to do it like once a quarter. So once every 6 to 12 months, I'll do that now.
Okay, great.
So exercise is a big one. I weightlift 3 to 4 days per week. I used to do more often, but now I'm balancing it with some more cardio. So I'll do weightlifting 3 to 4 days, and then I'll walk every single day, and then I'll also either run or bicycle. I'll run 3 days, and then I'll bicycle once. So I'm getting 4 days of cardio in there. I'm typically pushing myself. So I know a lot of people are advocates for like zone 2 cardio training, and it might be particularly good if you have a race goal and you're doing a marathon or whatnot. But I've actually been pushing myself to maximize my VO2 max, which is the maximum amount of oxygen that my body's able to utilize for at any given point in time for my cardiovascular output. And so as part of that, I've been doing a lot of mile runs as fast as I can. And my goal at 40 years old now is to outperform my 20-year-old self. And my 20-year-old self, I ran my fastest mile. So I'm now down to, I believe, the best I've done is 5 minutes and 32 seconds. So I'm within just 2 seconds of having my best time of my whole life at 40 years old. So that's something that I'm doing now. But for your listeners who are not really as athletically inclined, it's not that important to push yourself as hard as I am. In fact, there's an argument to be made that I might be pushing myself a little bit too hard when it comes to longevity, because studies have found that if you're pushing yourself too hard, it can actually increase your biological age. Not to the degree that it's worse than being sedentary. It's actually still in the top percentiles. But there is a happy medium where you get the best benefit is maybe doing 80%, not going to 95% like I am. But for most people, it really comes down to only having to do about 21 to 25 minutes a day of cardio. And that cardio can really just be like brisk walking, for example. Get into heart rate zone 2. Get your heart rate, depending on your age and your fitness level, that might be around like 100, 110 beats per minute. So you're feeling a little bit of a gasp of air if you're trying to talk to someone, but you can still talk to them. Do that for 20 to 25 minutes a day, and you're probably going to get 60, 70% of the benefits at that point.
Okay, great. And then people need to do weight-bearing exercise too, correct?
Yes. So I'm doing weightlifting 4 days a week, and I'm doing back. I do it the more traditional way, like back and biceps one day, chest and triceps, legs and lower back with deadlifts, and then shoulders. But yes, definitely weight-bearing exercise, especially for the legs. The whole body is important, sure, but legs, particularly because a lot of people will pass away when they're older from falling, and not necessarily the fall itself, but the consequences of that fall. So you fall and you might like sprain your ankle or break your leg or fall on your hip, and then you're in a wheelchair. And in that period that you're sedentary in the wheelchair then leads to the rapid decline, and the aging process can accelerate dramatically at that point. So it's not the fall itself where they crack their head. That's less likely. It's actually all of the consequences that follow from that fall.
Yeah, and then people they don't recover. They don't get out of the chair, out of the recliner. And I watched that happen to many family members, but especially after they break a bone, whatnot, from osteoporosis. So let's talk about your concept of the longevity hexagon. And so you have 6 components of that. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So two we've already spoken about. So one of them is diet, and that includes the timing of those meals and the calories in those meals and the meal components as well. Second is activity. So that's the exercise, and along with that exercise, it's actually not overdoing it, not pushing yourself too hard. So that's why I don't, for example, do an Ironman triathlon or a marathon, because that can cause excess inflammation. And so I balance that with adequate rest. Next is sleep and making sure that you are recovering properly. So a lot of people, myself included, when I was in my teens and 20s, I didn't respect sleep that much. I looked at it as, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead type of mentality, and I'm going to push myself hard. I'm going to work hard, play hard, that type of lifestyle. And it's not well advised. It's not smart. Like, we're realizing from scientific studies that it can increase the risk of all different diseases, including Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease. When we sleep well, we all know we wake up and we feel like a new person. We feel great. We're excited about life. We're more positive, optimistic. And our work, we perform better. We treat our loved ones better. And when we don't sleep well, all of that starts to slip, right? So life is just better. And so this is one of those things where both quality of life and quantity of life are both positively impacted by focusing on sleep.
So this episode is brought to you today by Purity Woods Skincare. So if you care about your health and longevity, which, let's face it, if you're listening to this show right now, you probably do, then I assume you know to watch what you eat, get plenty of exercise, and prioritize your sleep. But where I notice so many of my health conscious peers can drop the ball, so to speak, is when it comes to their personal care products. So truly, folks, we all need to be reading the ingredients list on any product that we're putting on our skin. It absorbs directly into your bloodstream. But how often do you buy skincare products because they're labeled as clean or organic, or they have organic in the name of the product, or they say paraben free, only to find out that there's a ton of toxic ingredients in them that are damaging to your skin, your body, and your hormones? Why is it so hard to find skincare products that are truly 100% USDA organic certified? So that's why I use and recommend Purity Woods Skincare. So Purity Woods' mission is to provide people with the cleanest and most effective healthy aging and longevity products available. And all of their products are USDA certified organic, non-GMO, free of anything artificial, free of toxic preservatives and synthetic additives like pesticides, chemical fertilizers, dyes, parabens, and of course, it's cruelty-free and never tested on animals. Purity Woods' best-selling product, the age-defying Dream Cream, has been flying off the shelves for a reason. So this formulation includes red maple leaf extract, along with collagen-boosting ingredients like organic mango seed butter and organic Indian gooseberry, which, if you don't know, it's the most antioxidant-rich fruit on earth. And as you know, I'm also a big research geek, and in recent years, there's been some genuinely fascinating science coming out of the University of Rhode Island about red maple leaf extract for the skin. So this little-known skincare ingredient has been shown to block the breakdown of elastin, the key protein in your skin that allows it to stretch and remain firm. So some researchers are even calling this ingredient a potential plant-based Botox, so to speak. So if you're ready to detox your skin routine of all those hormone-disrupting synthetic chemicals that plague 99% of the skincare industry, but you don't want to compromise on results, I highly recommend that you try out Purity Woods' age-defying Dream Cream. And if you don't agree that it's the best skincare you've ever used, your purchase is protected by their really generous 60-day happiness guarantee. But honestly, I've never seen a skincare product of this quality at this reasonable of a price point. And thankfully, the good people at Purity Woods have a special discount code specifically for my listeners. So you can try it yourself for 27% off today. Just go to puritywoods.com/Wendy or enter Wendy at checkout. So that's PURITYWOODS.com/Wendy or enter Wendy at checkout. Yeah, I see you're wearing an Oura ring there, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I have mine too. I'm trying to win the sleep Olympics. And I got my Oura ring just to accomplish that goal. But yeah, the sleep is the foundation of everything.
Definitely. And so some quick hacks that I use. I'm actually traveling right now. I'm in Miami for an event I'll be speaking at. But everywhere I go, I bring my earplugs, which most people don't actually insert earplugs properly. Watch a YouTube video to understand how to put it in your ear properly, because if you do it right, it'll block out 90% of the sound. And then a sleep mask. And then as long as the temperature is good in the bed and the pillow's comfortable, that's all I need. And that gets me 90% of the way there. There's other more advanced things people can do, and they tend to cost a lot of money. But to get to the 90% point, that's all it takes for me.
Yeah.
So after sleep, there's also psychology and relationships. So these are components that are associated with longer lifespans and better health spans. So you need to be able to try to minimize the stress in your life. And then if you have stress, to learn how to cope with that stress properly. And there are different methods, whether that be meditation or prayer or journaling, whatever works for you. Just make sure that you're able to cope with that stress, because you can take two different people and put them in the same exact scenario, and one person gets all riled up and super stressed out, and the other person just like gets through the experience like nothing happened. And guess who's actually healthier at the end of that experience, right? So sometimes you can't control the stressors in your life, but you can at least control how you react to those stressors, and that's very important. And then relationships. So the science shows that having 3 strong, positive, healthy relationships in your life with people that you feel like you can talk to them about anything that's happening in your life, that you can count on them, that they'll be there for you. They're not toxic relationships. That's the magic number for people to have to maximize their health span and lifespan. It's not about having 5 or 7 or 10 of these friends. It's about having the 3 really solid, close friends. And that can be a family member as well. It could be your sibling. It could be your mother or father, but just make sure it's someone that you feel like you can talk to them about anything that's on your mind. And that goes back to the stress. It will help you to cope with stress when you feel like you have someone who you can turn to. So that's very important. Next is supplementation. And so supplements, there's a wide range of supplements out there. And these supplements are, it depends on what category we're talking about, but you can start with, for example, general health supplements. These are essentially the nutrients that the government has set a minimum daily allowance for, right? So these are the vitamins, the essential vitamins and minerals, everything from vitamin A, the family of B vitamins, C, D, E, K, and then throw choline into the mix as well, the forgotten B vitamin as they call it, and then minerals, so potassium and sodium and chloride and magnesium, zinc, copper, and so on. So we need to reach a certain daily level of these. And when you eat a very healthy diet, the chances are that you're still going to have an inadequacy in at least one, most likely multiple of these vitamins or minerals, because it's nearly impossible today to eat a perfect diet that's going to get you everything you need. Take, for example, vitamin D. Like, it's really hard to get adequate vitamin D from your diet alone. And unless you're living like near the equator and you are light skinned and you're outdoors in the sun every day and getting it through the natural vitamin D production from the UV rays, which can also then accelerate skin aging. So it's there's 2 sides to that coin. You probably need vitamin D. You probably need some vitamin K supplementally. Probably need magnesium. More than 60% of people are deficient in magnesium. So that's the essentials, right? And that's just for baseline foundational health, making sure that, for example, your body can detox well and getting adequate selenium to help with that process. But then you can go into different categories of specialty. And so there are obviously athletic sport nutrition supplements, right? So maybe it's beta-alanine and arginine and creatine for weightlifting and physical performance. Then there's libido supplements, and there's nootropics for cognition, and so on. The area that I specialize in, and my company NOVOS specializes in, is in the longevity category of supplements. Now, a lot of companies out there are claiming to be longevity supplements when they're not actually longevity supplements. And so the way to define a longevity supplement is that it is shown in scientific research in ideally multiple animal species that it is extending lifespan by a statistically significant degree. And it's also, by extension, ideally increasing health span along with that process. And very, very few nutrients or supplements actually fit that criteria of being something that is extending health span and lifespan. Just because something feels good today or is optimizing performance today, take, for example, growth hormone. If someone in their 60s starts taking growth hormone, they're going to feel young again. But that's quite different from actually extending health span and lifespan. And there are arguments to be made that growth hormone might even reduce lifespan and increase the risk of cancer. So that's something that people oftentimes confuse, is the feeling of being younger compared to actually extending lifespan. And longevity is about extending health span and lifespan.
Yeah. So talk about some of the supplements that your company has and the benefits of them.
Sure. So the single product that we are most proud of is called NOVOS Core. So this is the first product in the world to ever address all 12 of the mechanisms of aging simultaneously. And so I brought on top scientists in the world to collaborate, and they're on our scientific advisory board, people like Dr. George Church, the geneticist from Harvard and MIT who invented genetic sequencing in 1984, Dr. Matt Kaberlein, who's very famous for his work as a gerontologist and his work with rapamycin and the Dog Aging Project to extend dog lifespan and so on. He was in Time magazine for that work. We've got more than a dozen of these scientists and medical doctors who study aging. And together we worked on this formulation. And not only did we base this on more than 400 scientific studies for the inclusion of the 12 ingredients in this formula, but we went on to do a number of scientific studies to validate the combination of these ingredients. Because believe it or not, when you are adding two healthy ingredients together, it doesn't necessarily lead to a healthier outcome. In fact, science has shown that oftentimes when you add two healthy ingredients together, they can counteract each other, and in some cases even have a negative outcome. So we wanted to make sure that our hypothesis for including all of these ingredients together was actually leading to better health outcomes. And so we did a number of in vitro studies where we looked at DNA damage, for example, and we were able to show that we significantly reduced DNA damage by as much as 77% from irradiation. So think of like UV rays. We did another in vitro study where we looked at human skin cells, and we administered really harsh chemotherapeutics to those cells because that's a potent toxin. And we wanted to see if our supplement was able to protect these cells from a really potent threat. And we were able to. That's a peer-reviewed study that was published in the journal Nutrients in August of this year. And you can find that on our website. But we prevented single and double strand DNA breaks. We've done another study where we looked at cellular senescence, which I mentioned before, the zombie cells. And we compared ourselves to the prescription drug rapamycin. And that's the gold standard for longevity drugs. And we were able to reduce the size of senescent cells by approximately the same order of magnitude as rapamycin. We did another study at the Salk Institute, a very prestigious lab in California, and we looked at this process known as oxytosis ferroptosis, which can lead to Alzheimer's and certain forms of cancer. And we were able to reduce that process, again, in an in vitro study, by more than 50% compared to a prescription R&D drug that's in the pipeline right now for approval, specifically for those diseases. So that's a lot of in vitro studies. Then we did an in vivo study with mice, and we found that we were able to extend mouse lifespan by more than any supplement ever studied. This is in aged mice. That just came out. It's a preprint right now, the study, but that just came out about a month and a half ago. We published that on our website as well. And then we did a case study with people, and almost 3/4 of the participants, after taking NOVOS Core and NOVOS Boost, a second product of ours, for 6 months, were found to have a reduced biological rate of aging by the equivalent of more than 1 month per year. And the 1/4 that did not improve also did not get worse. So we believe, we're hopeful that we're actually protecting those people, because you would expect some people in the study should have sped up their aging. And the fact that nobody did indicates that we're likely protecting them. And now we have a clinical trial underway to study the benefits further. And that's all of the science behind it. But in terms of like the practical real world benefits, People report improvements in their skin health within 4 to 8 weeks, improvements in mood, sleep, energy, and cognition. And it's a daily drink mix. It's in a sachet. It would otherwise require more than 15 pills, but you tear it open. There's an orange flavor, sweetened with stevia, so there's no sugar. And then we also have an unflavored version. If people don't want the stevia, they can have unflavored, and that tastes good mixed in anything flavored, like a juice, a smoothie, a protein shake, or a yogurt.
Okay, fantastic. And then you said you had the Boost product as well. What is that?
Yes. So we have 2 products, actually. So NOVOS Boost is a simple product. It's these tiny pills. You take 2 a day, and it's NMN. So NMN became very popular after Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard talked about it. And it's a precursor for NAD. And NAD is essential for cellular energy production, as well as DNA repair processes that are fueled by these molecules known as sirtuins. So that's NMN. That's our entry-level product. It's the least expensive. We call it Boost because it's a great booster to NOVOS Core. Core is the core foundational supplement in our lineup. If you get one single thing, I would suggest it be Core. But if you can afford to stack that with Boost, we would suggest that. And then finally, we have NOVOS Vital. And these are daily chews. And you take 4 of them a day. I personally take 2 of them with lunch, 2 with dinner. They focus on organs that decline with age. So specifically the brain, eyes, heart, liver, kidneys, muscle, and gut. Most supplements will focus on one single organ. We're all about making this as simple as possible for people and an enjoyable experience. That's why we make a tasty drink. We make these sweet chews that taste great. So it's an enjoyable experience where you're getting 7 supplements targeting 7 organs all at once. And it includes apple cider vinegar in it, a full hefty dose of it, so you can have it with your meal. It will help with digestion and metabolism. But then we've got other really potent ingredients in there for all of those other organs.
Yeah, fantastic. And what is the ingredients in the first product you talked about?
Sure. So NOVOS Core contains calcium alpha-ketoglutarate, glycine, which is an amino acid, glucosamine sulfate, pterostilbene, which is found in blueberries, fisetin, which is found in strawberries. But the dosage level for both of these is orders of magnitude beyond what people consume on a daily basis of these foods. Ginger extract, malate, and in the form of a magnesium malate. So malate has longevity benefits. This is what makes apples a little bit tart. And then magnesium, we mentioned before, most people are deficient. Hyaluronic acid, the oral form, has a number of benefits, both for longevity, surprisingly, but also for skin health and hydration and joint lubrication. L-theanine from green tea, which is great for focus, but it's also been found in longevity studies to extend lifespan. Rhodiola rosea, which is an adaptogen. Vitamin C, which is really intended to improve the benefits of the alpha-ketoglutarate, the first ingredient I mentioned. And finally, the most controversial ingredient, but a really powerful healthy ingredient, is microdosed lithium. And it's actually technically, by scientific definition, a trace dose of lithium, but it's only 1 milligram. So this is hundreds of times lower than most prescription doses of lithium. And we evolve with lithium in our water supply and in our food. So with municipal water now, we filter everything and we get rid of all of the natural minerals in them. But if you had, for example, San Pellegrino brand bottled water, that has high levels of lithium in it. And if you're eating fresh salmon, for example, you're going to have lithium in it because lithium leaches through the rocks into the water, into the fresh water that we consume throughout evolution. And it's been found, lithium, to be correlated in multiple studies with, for example, lower rates of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, lower rates of depression, of bipolar disorder, of suicide. So to be clear, for FDA reasons, I'm not saying that lithium is going to prevent these things directly, but it's correlated with these. And there's a lot of science behind potential health benefits from lithium.
So I want to introduce you to one of my favorite podcasts. It's from Dr. Jockers, and he hosts the Dr. Jockers Functional Nutrition podcast. Dr. Jockers is such a wealth of knowledge, and I just love how thorough he is with, every podcast and blog post that he produces. His Instagram has amazing infographics that make learning about health so clear and easy. And I just love his content, and I know that you are going to also. He's got over 400 podcast episodes where he shares practical tips around topics like fasting, disease prevention, brain health, and so much more. He's so thorough. Dr. Jockers has hundreds of 5-star reviews for his podcast. So if you're looking to continue to grow on your health journey, just search for Dr. Jockers on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. You won't regret it. I highly, highly recommend his show. Yeah, and everyone's deficient in lithium because we do hair mineral analysis. Every single person does not have lithium, and we need it. And it helps to detox aluminum as well, which I think, helps with some of the brain benefits. And, we also need lithium to make GABA and help to relax us. So really important critical mineral that everybody's missing for the most part.
Definitely. I didn't know that about aluminum, but when I've been tested for aluminum, I have extremely low levels. So it's probably partly at least from the lithium.
Yes, yeah, it's so important. And so let's talk about the aging test that you have. And so you said this is an epigenetic test?
Yes. So it's called NOVOS Age. There are 3 outputs from it, soon to be 4. So the first output is your pace of aging. This is powered by an algorithm called Dunedin pace. And this is arguably the most accurate and precise of all biological age clocks out there. It is created by researchers at Columbia and Duke universities. They used a longitudinal data set from a cohort called the Dunedin cohort in New Zealand. So these people were followed from 5 years old to, I believe they're around 50 years old now. And like more than 30 different biomarkers were taken from these people, including like white matter in their brains and all different blood tests and sit-stand tests and grip strength and different assessments of their lifestyles and so on. And so with all of this data, scientists were able to then run epigenetic tests and then determine how fast or slow somebody is aging based on their epigenome. And this is something that you can speed up or slow down, as we mentioned before, based on lifestyle. So that's the first test. And we emphasize that that should be the primary thing that consumers should look at when they purchase the test, more than any other output in the test. The second is a biological age clock. This is just to scratch the itch of, well, if I'm 40 years old, chronologically, how old am I biologically? Everyone's curious. Now, that algorithm is in the process of being upgraded, and that's going to be out very soon. And that algorithm is a brand new algorithm out of Yale University, and it's significantly more accurate than the current one that we're using. Along with that algorithm, a new output is going to be organ ages. So we'll be able to tell you the age of different organs like your heart or your liver, or your kidneys, your brain, and so on. And then finally, the final output is telomere length. And we mentioned before, your telomeres are the protective end caps of your chromosomes, or one of the 12 mechanisms of aging. And you want to make sure that they're not too short. You're not in the lower percentile. So we can tell you based on your chronological age, what percentile you are in for your telomere length.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to take that test. I forgot to ask you about that before you came on the show. But yeah, I've done other biological age tests, and I was 5 years younger than my biological age, which I was thrilled to hear about. It's doing a glycan test, testing glycans. But it's just one parameter. And like you mentioned, there's a lot of different ways to test for your biological age.
Right. And glycans might be more associated with like inflammation. And so it's like one aspect of aging, but it's not as powerful as the epigenome, because the epigenome is really, it's reacting to everything in our lives, everything from the foods we eat and the inflammation in our bodies, and even our psychology impacts our epigenome. Like everything is impacting that epigenome. So it's more of like a source of truth, whereas glycans are kind of an aspect of aging. But if ultimately you get a score that's 5 years younger, or ideally to play with a nicer number, if it's 7 or 8 years, research has found that every 7 to 8 years, our risk of death doubles. So, which when you're young, it's like a very, very low number. It's like, say, 1 in 100,000. But when you're getting older, like when you reach centenarian status, 100 years plus, your risk of death is approximately 50%, right? And so the point is that if you are reducing your biological age by, say, 7 or 8 years, that implies that you are probably at 50% of the risk of other people your chronological age of passing away or getting a chronic illness. That's what it implies, that result.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important marker to test, to see just one of the markers where you can see if what you're doing is working or not. And certainly it's great for biohackers that are looking to, quantify what it is that they're doing and if it's working.
Definitely. I look at it as, I like to call it a North Star metric, right? So you've got like these blood labs that get really into the weeds, and you specialize in that, and you can help people to comprehend that. But what if we just want to see, like, overall, how am I doing? How is my health? Am I above average? Am I below average? And are the changes that I'm making in my life actually moving the needle and bringing me to a healthier state? That's where these algorithms come in. Because as a doctor, if you took a comprehensive blood panel, you can identify things that are in range and out of range. But I don't think you would say that you could look at the whole thing holistically and say, like, comparing two people, let's just say both of them are in range on everything. Looking at both of them and saying, okay, you are definitively healthier than this other person. Like, it's hard to actually synthesize all of that information into a conclusive statement about that person's state of health relative to other people. And that's where biological age clock comes in, where it's a simple metric where we can actually see if, regardless of the directions that these different biomarkers are going, are you trending in the right direction or in the wrong direction? And then you can dig into specific issues like you do on individual biomarkers.
Yes, yes. Well, why don't you tell us where we can get your supplements and do your test?
Sure. So the website is novoslabs.com, and you can find us on all of the social networks as NOVOS Labs. We also have a free mobile app on the website. You can find it. It's called NOVOS Life. It's Android and iOS. We're a public benefit corporation, so we produce as many free resources for people as possible. That app is one of them. NOVOS Age, which I mentioned before, is another. And then we also have a blog called NOVOS Flow, which has tons of information written typically by PhDs or MDs on the subject matter. And then I'm personally on all of the social networks as Slow My Age. And I have a blog called Slow My Age. And also a documentary is coming out, narrated by Edward Norton. And it's got people like Steve Aoki and Tony Hawk and Tony Robbins and Peter Diamandis and so on in it. And I'll be in that film. It's about longevity. So by the time people hear this, it's probably out already. And that's on Apple TV and on Amazon Prime.
Yeah. What is the name of the documentary?
Longevity Hackers.
Okay, great. Fantastic. So definitely everybody check that out. And, I found you because I was researching anti-aging supplements and just, digging into that research, and I found your website and was very, very impressed with your site and everything that you're doing, and wanted to have you come on the show. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on. Nice to meet you.
Yes. And everyone, thanks so much for joining the Myers Detox Podcast. I'm Dr. Wendy Myers, and just it's such a privilege to every week bring experts from around the world to help you connect the dots with your health. And, my only goal with this show is to help you, find those missing pieces of the puzzle and make some connections and help you to upgrade your health. So thanks for tuning in every week, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Myers Detox Podcast is created and hosted by Wendy Myers. This podcast is for information purposes only. Statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Wendy Myers and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.